In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
It is 100% real. There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA.
What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode 31 of Curious Dimension, where we take you beyond the boundaries of conventional thinking. In this episode, I have a conversation with veteran UFO researcher Grant Cameron, who brings 50 years of experience investigating the UFO phenomenon. We dive deep into pivotal events like the groundbreaking 2017 New York Times article that redefined public perceptions of UFOs and recount stories from Cameron's early days of research, including his own UFO sightings. From exploring the mysterious telepathy tapes, which I think is one of the most important podcasts out there right now. If you haven't checked out the telepathy tapes, I highly recommend you check that out. Also, take a look at episode 29 with Dr. Diane Hennessy Powell that we did. All the work in the telepathy tapes is based off of her work. We also talk about the mental aspects of the phenomenon to the critical role of consciousness in this conversation. We're going to be shedding light on the deeper and overlooked dimensions of the UFO mystery. Grant also shares insights into high-level government interactions, the enigmatic Wilson Davis memo, and the fascinating intersection of science and spirituality. Prepare for an eye-opening discussion about downloads of information, the nature of contact, and the transformative implications for society and science. So let's jump right in with Grant Cameron. All right, Grant, we are rocking and rolling. How are you today?
Good, Matt, and yourself?
Yeah, very good. I've been really looking forward to this one. I've been paying attention to your podcast for a while now. It's one of the better ones out there on the topic of UFOs and all this interesting stuff that's been coming about. We are definitely in interesting times for this topic.
Yeah, I've been in it for 50 years, and I keep telling people 2017 I never thought it would come. And everything just flipped in 2017. Once the New York Times said, yeah, this is okay. Government's doing it. Didn't freak anybody out. Nobody jumped off a bridge. And we've been rolling since then. Although I still think it's going to, in the last couple of years, I've become convinced it's way more complex than people think it is.
So 50 years. Let's talk about this for a second. So you've been at this a long time. You've seen the tide shift in 2017 with the New York Times article. Can you tell me a little bit what it was like when you first started getting into this? You probably weren't having a lot of conversations at the dinner table about this topic, or if you did, people probably looked at you in a certain way. Can you take me back in time a little bit to how you got first started in this?
Yeah, I was raised very religious, but I don't remember really thinking about UFOs or anything like that. I was into Edgar Cayce. I was into weird stuff. I had read a little bit of Edgar Cayce, but I didn't really think about UFOs. It was only because this small town outside the city where I used to live had this stuff going on. And I said to my friend, we used to drive around the big city. And I said, instead of driving around the city, let's go out and see what people are looking at. And we didn't go. We were going to go in February. This thing started in February of 1975. And we didn't go till May, till the local TV station got a film of this thing jumping off the ground. So it's like Nimitz going backwards. It went from ground level to 5,000 feet in the air in 3 frames of film. And the guy was 8.25 miles away. We know exactly where the camera was. We know from the markings on the ground where the UFO was. And I remember I said to my friend, come on, let's go and see what this was. And we went out there. And I remember we were driving around the town. It was a town called Carmen, Manitoba, just north of the U.S. border. And we were there and we didn't know what we're looking around. What's everybody looking at here? I think it doesn't, whatever I remember saying, whatever it is, isn't very significant. So my friend said, he was driving and he said, okay, we'll drive back into Carmen one more time. If we don't see anything, let's go home. I said, fantastic. Been total waste of time. He just turned the car around to go back in and it appeared from the left to the right. And I still remember to this day, it was almost like having been raised to be a minister. The idea was that you heard that there was miracles in the Bible, but only in the Bible. There's no miracles. There's nothing. And I just went, wow, there's miracles. It just blew me away. I was just so amazed by this thing. And what I did the second night, it came right at me and it flew away. And one of the most important things that ever happened was the second night as it was flying away. I remember watching this thing as it came right at me and then it made a turn and it flew away. And I was watching it because it was flying off into the distance. And I'm thinking to myself, that is so cool. That could actually be an extraterrestrial from another planet. I'm so lucky. I can't believe I actually got to see this. Because we went out there. I said it was like buying the lottery ticket. There's a chance you're going to win, but you ain't going to win nothing, man.
Right.
And so I was like, oh, wow, I actually saw something. I couldn't believe it. And it's like I won the lottery. But then I'm looking at it, and this is what drove my whole career. I went, what's it doing? It's not doing anything. It's just flying along. It's both nights, it wasn't doing anything. And I came to this whole idea of what Bob Bigelow talked about. When they asked Bob Bigelow, George Knapp asked him, so Bob, what was it all about? What's the bottom line? And he said, instantly, he said messaging. And that's what I would say too. They're not doing anything. They're just messaging. They're there. They want you to go, what the heck? Because sometimes now I call it the Jesus circus, where they do all the miracles and they do all this kind of stuff and they get your attention. And then maybe they'll deliver the message down the road as to who they are and what they're actually doing. But so that's how it started for me. And I got obsessed with it immediately. I was at university, and at university, I was trying to think, what are you going to do? I was taking calculus, and I kept saying to the guy, what's a function? Like, where'd the numbers go? This doesn't make sense to me. And I go, like, how do you make any money from this thing? It's just, in chemistry, I was like, I couldn't figure out, what am I going to do with my life? And this was just like a total waste. And when I saw this, I got obsessed, and I went out and I interviewed half the people in the town claimed to have seen this. In the high school, I think the figure was 59% of kids said in the last 2 years they'd seen something UFO related. So I went and I interviewed all these people, and I got the book. And remember, I tried to put it through Toronto, Canada, where all the big publishing companies were, and one read it, but no, there was nothing major. And then the local publisher in the big town where I lived, I sent it to her, and she came back, and this is a famous story. Everybody in the city knew about this story because it was pretty famous. And she said, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And I went, what? Are you kidding me?
In the same
from
town.
then on, I've never been interested in sightings. All I've been interested in that thing the second night when it was flying around. I go, what's it doing? And so I think, I don't know what it's doing, but somebody's got to know what the hell is going on here. And that's when I started this search of going after the highest level people I could find in the Canadian government, in the U.S. government, in U.S. intelligence. And a lot of times I wouldn't engage these people, but I would listen very carefully to interviews they were doing, conversations that they would be having and stuff like that, and realize there were people who may have little pieces of it. So that was my obsession, was to try to figure out what's really going on. What is this? And that's been a 50-year search. And at the end of last year, I thought that I had the answer. I had enough. I really wasn't that keen on it anymore. I figured that it's got the bottom line as to what's actually going on here, and said, I don't know if I'll do this anymore. And then the telepathy tapes that we'll talk about happened. And that was like, whoa. It's like it's almost like just when you're ready to pull out, they drag you back in again.
Yeah, and that's yet the telepathy tapes. Like, that is a massive step forward in this conversation that I never thought I'd ever see anything like that. I'd always been aware that something like this had been a thing. I wasn't 100% aware of Dr. Diane Powell's work until recently, but I interviewed her a couple weeks ago, and that podcast just dropped on Friday night. And then I read her book, The ESP Enigma, and you find out that she's citing work that's going back decades and decades of other people that have been documenting that particular phenomenon. And then you start to peel that onion back and you realize, oh, there's people that have known about this, but they've been keeping this quiet for various reasons. There's funding involved with helping these kids out. And I think what Kai is doing over there is massively important. She's changing the conversation about that. What is let's just jump right into the telepathy tape since this is fresh. Let's talk about Kai, what she's doing and this work. Where do you see this going, and how important is this?
I think there'll probably be major pushback from it. We even got a guy from McGill University in Montreal who led the attack against Diane Hennessy Powell. And I actually wrote him and I said, oh, Diane is about to do research at a university in the United States. Would you like to be part of it? We need a subject. You can go into the experiment and you can show that these little kids are faking this or whatever you want to say. And you can be a subject, and let's see you do it under controlled conditions from Diane Hennessy Powell. He said, no, not me. No, you give me a name of some guy in the United States. And I said, no, I'm not looking for somebody to sit on the sidelines and tell us what he thinks is going on. I want somebody to be in the experiment. I don't need the Pope talking to me about sex and marriage. What the hell would he know? And that's why I basically said, no, I want to put you on the line. And then he disappeared. And that's the whole thing. So you're going to get this pushback because if you realize what they've discovered, and it actually was mostly Diana Hesse Powell. I met her at a thing called The Gathering in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, as an event where 50 sort of researchers and stuff were brought in by this multimillionaire guy, and we just wandered around and cocktail parties, and nothing was really happening. And we got to talk to each other. And so I met her, and that was after I had my consciousness experience. My background is that I got the UFO thing. I worked it till 2012, and I'm watching this lecture by Colin Andrews on crop circles. And a lot of the paranormal phenomena, like I never really got into Sasquatch, even though I realized that was important. And even remote viewing, I never really got into. And crop circles, I wasn't interested. It was this idea where I go into the lecture, and I wrote a book called Contact Modalities, where I talk about this idea. It's almost like it just occurred to me yesterday. It's like the idea of in the Bible that people believe the Bible is the inspired word of God. And I do have that belief now that there's a field. So everything is in the field, everything that you want to know. And a lot of people will tell you this, like the UFO experiences, 40% of UFO experiencers will say at one point during their experience, they knew the answer to everything in the universe. And I basically look at it and say, why would you not talk to these people? You can maybe disbelieve this, but something's going on here. And so it's, if you're looking at what we do in normal life, it's all in perception. And what I basically came to the conclusion was everything you perceive is going to be wrong. Everything that we've straightened out a few things, like the world ain't flat, the sun doesn't go around the earth, all this kind of stuff. But as we go along, we suddenly realized only in 1911 that everything was space. We thought it was a solid, and the electrons were embedded like a fruitcake and stuff like that. And we go on and we go on. And that's what the phenomena is doing. It's teaching us that no, the world is not the way you think it is. And this weird thing happens, and you start to doubt the world. You start to doubt what you've been taught in school and stuff like that. So when the telepathy tapes came along, it was the same sort of thing where it was just blew me away. When Diane, the first one she had, I don't know how much you got. I'm actually interviewing her tomorrow, and I was interested in something I didn't know until the telepathy tapes came out. Even though I've seen Diane's work for many years after I met her at this event, and it was the idea that kids and all these people, they're able to do not just telepathy, but when you start listening to telepathy tapes, you hear this thing, especially about the foreign languages. And I didn't realize this. Diana Hesse Powell, her first major subject was this Haley girl who got 162 numbers right in a row. And in that one, the way they discovered her was her carekeeper, the one that took care of her. She believed that Haley was reading her mind. So she said, how do you say, I love you in German? And she typed it into her thing, and she went, holy cow, she's reading my mind. And it was a foreign language. And then she has this young kid who was 2 years old who could speak 8 different languages at 2 years old. And that was one of the things that blew me away by the telepathy tapes, was this idea. And they say all these kids can do foreign languages. They do languages they've never heard before and stuff like that. And that's when you start to realize that the world that you think you understand is not the world that it is. It's more magnificent. And it's almost like when you go into outer space. Like, I remember they had the thing where they said, oh, there's 100 billion galaxies. And then suddenly there was this article came out and said, oh no, we made a mistake. It's 2 trillion. And it's, come on, you're up by 20 times. You were out by 2,000%. And or when you go down into the quantum realm, the very small things, I remember David Bohm had made this comment. He said, when you figure out that quantum thing, there's just another level below the quantum thing. And they all know. And that's the thing. The more you look, whether you go out into outer space or deep into the quantum realm, you realize it gets more complex and more complex. So I spent a lot of time in my life looking at things that are like really, I call it the naming theory, where you give it a name and make it go away, like migration, like monarch butterflies. So I lived in the area where the monarch butterflies would go. Most people don't realize monarch butterflies don't have one season. They have 4 sessions in one season. So the one that goes to Mexico, to this little couple square mile area, that one flies back to the Texas area, and it has eggs, and then it flies to northern United States, and then it has eggs, and then it flies into Canada, and that generation is the one that goes back to Mexico. It hasn't been there. Its parents haven't been there. Its grandparents haven't been there. Its great grandparents have been there. And this thing, you can take it from Winnipeg, where I lived, take it to the East Coast the day before it migrates, and it will find its way there. And those kind of mysteries is people are just assuming, they say, oh, it's just placebo. It's just a spontaneous remission. It's just this. And it's, who the hell is that? They're just giving it a name, and they make it go away. So when I saw the telepathy tapes and I saw they could speak foreign languages, they were talking to dead people. They claimed to be talking to God. They were precognitive. And it was when I wrote this, a couple of books I've written on this whole phenomena, is when you start to look at it, the contact modality idea is that there is a level that everything is in there, and we're blocked this level. Our filters are blocked, but these kids are able to get into that field. So when I had my download experience of the consciousness thing, the modality that I was using was daydreaming. And that's the thing, is if you sit there and you turn your left brain off and you're daydreaming. I didn't want to be in this lecture. I had no interest in crop circles. I was just sitting there listening. I'm thinking, oh, I should go across the river. But then I'm thinking Colin Andrews is a major figure. I should actually listen to this guy. I've never seen him lecture before. I'll go in and I'll watch this lecture. I went in there and I was just like, and it just came to me instantaneously. And with people, you talk to people who have the downloads, they're almost like this inspired word that where they get something, they will say what I will say. And it's the hardest thing to explain to people who have not had a download, is it comes with absolute certainty. It's not like this is an idea. This is how it works. And you just go, wow. I remember I had one in 2016, my second big one. I was walking down a street. I do that a lot. I'll walk. I'm 4 hours a day. I walk, and so my mind will shut off, and I'll get ideas or whatever. And I know when I'm in the field, there's a certain feeling. It's if I say to you, "Okay, Matt, who was your first girlfriend?" The name pops into your head, and then I say, "Are you sure?" And you, "I'm sure. Don't tell me. I know." And it's that feeling. It's, oh yeah. Or somebody reminds you, "Who's that guy we used to play football with? That guy was really good." And that guy, it was John. Oh yeah, John. And it pops in your head, and it's real. So it was this absolute certainty thing. And so these kids, according to my idea, and Diane picked this up, she said in one of her promotional tapes where she had to redo an experiment because some skeptic clown was going after it, and she was raising money to redo the experiment to invalidate this complaint that the guy had, and she couldn't raise the money for it. And I felt very sorry for her. And that's the whole deal, is that she worked through this and raised this issue to where Kai Dickens picks up on it. And then she starts running around. Now, I remember when I interviewed Kai, and that's when I said to her, I said, "How many are?" And she's 200. I go, 200? I thought there was the two that they had were both Diane Hennessy Powell. And they've got all these kids, especially when they go, the one where I say is Nobel Prize winning stuff that just shifts your whole idea, is where they go to the Hill. This idea that these kids all across America. So these aren't kids that are interacting with each other out of the house. These are kids that are in the house. They're nonverbal, which is what Diana C. Powell said. And that's my theory as well, is that what you're doing is you're shutting down the left brain. And when you can shut down the left brain, you can go into the field and your right brain is the one in contact. So all these kids have nonverbal. So their left brain is shut down. They've got left brain damage, which is what allows them to shut that part of the brain off that's causing the interference. And because they're nonverbal, they're totally shut down. And that's why the information is so accurate, where these kids are like 100%. And I went to the major people, all the major people in ufology. And I said, even like Kid Green, who had run experiments, he was going to run an experiment where they were going to do a telepathy experiment, where they were going to put Uri Geller in one MRI machine, and they were going to put a woman by the name of Kay Randall May, who's the best medical intuitive in the United States. They're going to put her in another machine, and then one would send a signal to the other, and they would see, is it non-local? Is it happening at exactly the same time? So I sent it to him, and he said, "I'm very interested. I'm watching closely." But nobody in the UFO field did anything. I contacted the main guy that's running the Bigelow Project on consciousness, and everybody thought it was interesting. Interesting. It's, come on, this is I call it the Rosetta Stone, because that's the whole thing. If these kids are telepathic and they can pick up stuff and talk to people, the world is completely, it all falls apart, almost like the New York Times article. Everything you believe, go, oh my goodness, we're wrong. It all falls apart. And this new world that is non-local and consciousness based, which is partly what I was told in 2013 in this download experience, is consciousness. You may remember when you were watching that thing fly away, and you said, "What's going on? What's it doing?" Consciousness. And I went, consciousness. And as I make the joke, in 2012, before I went in that lecture, I could not have spelled consciousness. I couldn't have cared less. I had no idea. And I just knew it had to do with ESP, and it fit, and everything fit. And that changed my whole life. I went from chasing nuts and bolts stuff. And I keep telling people there's actually one entity that gave to somebody, and I'm still trying to find it. And the idea was, don't go down the technology route. That's a trap. And that's what I keep saying to people. Even now, these guys that are ignoring it, is because now, as I point out in a lot of my Twitter posts, and I'll get people upset, and who cares? I talk about the fact that this consciousness and the woo stuff has been banned from the Seoul conference. And it's what you're going to do is the same thing you've done for 80 years. Let's get more photographs. Let's get better monitors. Let's get more sightings and stuff like that. And all you're doing is the same thing over and over. And it's the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and believing you're going to come to a different conclusion. You cannot, or even Gary Nolan, who runs the Soul Conference, he made his own quote. He said, if you're a scientist worth his salt, why would you take any information off the table? But what's happening is these guys they're at big universities and they got PhDs and they're afraid about what people are going to say at the Thanksgiving dinner and stuff like that. And that's everybody's reverting back and they say, first we'll teach people about nuts and bolts, then we'll go to the consciousness thing. But you're never going to solve it by going to nuts and bolts. We've done that for 80 years, all this kind of stuff. And as the top guy who briefs the president said, lights in the sky have no usable information. And it's the contactees. And that's where I've always pushed. I said, the people who are having the interactions, you may have a couple of them are making stuff up, but most of them are telling you exactly what's going on. And they've been in the field, the same as these kids, these telepathy kids. The contactees have been in the field and they're getting material and they believe they've got the answer to everything, even though it was taken away. And so that's where I ended up, where I said, I think I know what's going on. That the phenomena to me is, it's basically, it does this Jesus circus, almost like the telepathy thing. It's just really weird. They do this really weird stuff. And what they're trying to do is make you stop and think that the world is not the way you think it is. Because the way we do it is we go in like we did to Iraq. We go into Iraq and we say, we're here to bring you freedom, democracy, Jesus, and McDonald's. And then they point guns and say, get the hell out of our country. Who do you think you are? And stuff like that. We're doing the left brain thing. We're giving the left brain lecture. They're doing the right brain thing where they're cutting out the rational analytical side. And they're doing almost like the right brain is all symbols. So you have dreams is symbols, psychedelics is symbols. They're giving you these symbols and they're forcing you to figure this thing out.
Mm. Wow, Grant, a lot to unpack there. That was awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've always said that when you start talking about UFOs, that the consciousness conversation inevitably comes up, because that's where the abductee, the contactee, that's where this conversation is going, right? Contact is where this is always going, right? Yeah, it's fun to talk about nuts and bolts, but something is behind there.
Yeah.
Open contact, where this is going to head. When you get to that point, you have to understand that an alien's not coming to your house to have coffee. It's going to interact with you in a way that's going to be on this consciousness level. And I know we were talking about Gary's work before, and I think there's a little bit of that in there, clearly with the Rendlesham Forest download that Jim Penniston got. But yeah, so I agree with you. I think that this consciousness conversation is probably where this needs to go. And you're right, I didn't think about that. There is a lot of people that just focus on the nuts and bolts of this whole thing. And they what's the word I'm looking for? They block out the consciousness conversation because maybe they feel that that's a step too far.
Yeah, that's like the religious thing. It's like the separation between science and religion. You can't go there. I'm a scientist. I have to be rational and analytical and stuff like that. And I say that doesn't count. Yeah, I'm skeptical. And no, skeptic is not more logical and thinks it through more. A skeptic is one thing and one thing only. A person with a very set worldview, and it may be a religious worldview or a scientific worldview. And so if you get into this thing, because before 2012, there's nobody talking about consciousness except for Colin Andrews. And then I got into it, and there's people now, everybody's talking about consciousness, even though most of them don't even know what they're talking about. They know it's a buzzword, and they got to use this word. And so the consciousness thing is the thing that nobody wants to really touch. You'll even see, if you take a look, you'll see the major documentaries will not touch it. They say, can't go there. And we want to be respectable. That's always been the problem we had in the UFO field, is we're always the Rodney Dangerfield of all science. We don't get any respect. And if you're a guy with a PhD and you went to MIT and paid $50,000 a year for tuition, you don't want to suddenly learn that 90% of what you learned is nonsense. You're not going to go. And that's what there was even an expression, I think, that Einstein used. And again, it was one of these ones I went back to try to find it, where Einstein said, you spend your birth to 25 years old learning and inventing and creating. And after 25, you spend the rest of your life defending what you did. And that's what it basically comes down to. Or Max Planck said, you got to remember, Max Planck was the godfather of quantum physics. And he made this expression, which means it hasn't changed. It's the same thing back then. He was considered crazy. And he said, science does not advance by convincing your opponent that you're right. Science advances when they die, one funeral at a time. Your opponents die, and the new generation is not offended with the new idea, and that's what happens. So it's going to happen slowly. We're like the Western society; we want everything yesterday, and we got to realize this thing may take a while to unravel. Especially when I saw this thing with the consciousness being banned at Seoul, which is the main place where people are doing discussions, and the idea where Whitley Strieber says that Elizondo and Mellon won't give him an interview because he's the craziest of them all, Whitley Strieber. He's the ultimate contactee. And so you don't want to be associated with these people. And they may have good intentions of saying, we'll get it first in terms of getting people to understand that UFOs are real, then we'll go to the consciousness thing. But you're never going to convince anybody it's real, because you'll even see now with the Arrow board, they're doing exactly what Blue Book did. And even UFO people like Leslie Kane will admit, there's 90% of stuff is all natural. So we've already conceded that 90% of it's nonsense, even though it's probably not 90%, it's probably a way less. And so it's down to the 10%. And what Blue Book did is exactly what Arrow's doing. They're saying there's 5%, we don't have enough data. And the other 5%, if we had more data, we could explain those as well. We just don't know. We put them in an unknown category. So Blue Book had all these unknowns, the same as these guys have these unknowns. And everybody talk, there's unknowns. It doesn't matter. UFOs exist. And I guess I'm privileged in that if I was in their situation, where I'd never seen a UFO. But for me, I saw a UFO. I don't need to go there. And in fact, there was even an event that happened at Shasta where I was going to Shasta. I don't know if you know the whole story about Shasta with the portals and stuff like that. And I went there. There was a girl that helped me do books and stuff. And she was one of these people, Latino, and they go sit on the mountain and they meditate. And they have what's called a controlled sighting and a program sighting. So they'll tell you exactly when the sighting is going to take place, exactly where it's going to take place. And they sit there and they meditate for 2 days and they do yoga and they do all this weird stuff. And they raise their vibration and the UFOs lower their vibration and they have these contacts. And so I was going there, and halfway there, I was with my other assistant, and we were going across the desert, and her cell phone rings, and it's Aunt Terrell, it's the being, and through other people. And the message came back. Aunt Terrell says he knows Grant's coming to the mountain. There's going to be a program sighting Saturday night. So I go, holy cow, there's going to be a portal, because I had done the story about 2014, 2015, where the portal opens and the beings are there, and there's 7 people inside this portal, and they're talking to the being, and everybody's having a different conversation and stuff. I go, holy cow, there's going to be a portal. But I'm thinking, I'm not really that interested in going to a portal. I'm only going because Katerina wanted me to go, and she helped me. So I'm going to go sit on the mountain and meditate. I said to Katerina, I got nothing against meditation, Katerina. I got nothing against sitting on a mountain, but I don't know if I want to sit on a mountain and meditate for 2 days. And I go, okay, you help me, I'll go. And so I went. That's why I was going. So when the idea with the portal, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, I guess it's me. They want me to go through the portal. So I'm thinking, okay. So I start the fasting, because they fast. So this is Wednesday. I start fasting. The event is Saturday night and stuff like that. So we get there, and the event happens, and it's not like what I saw in 1975. 1975 flew right in front of the car. There's no doubt what this thing was, because we were looking in 75. We're looking at going, what are they looking at? And then when the thing came, nobody said, is that what they're looking at? I wonder if that's what it is. Everybody's like, there it is. Holy cow! It was like this blurred. So that's. Well, what happened was it started flashing over my head, these flash bulbs, and the one was really bright. And I'm looking up and I'm thinking, man, it's right over my head. And I'm thinking, no, it's got to be over the group, because there's 125 people in this round circle. I said, got to be over the group. And then I'm looking, no, it's right above me. And the other people told me, yeah, it was right above you. And this thing was flashing. And Ricardo Gonzalez, who was running the event, was sitting right beside me. And as soon as the event was over, he opened this little book, and his wife had the cell phone. She's pointing the light on the cell phone, because it's darkest. He can't see a hand in front of your face. She's pointing, and he's doing automatic writing. And I said to my assistant desk, I said, he's doing automatic writing. Why didn't I bring my video? I had a video camera there. Why didn't I bring my video camera? I'm looking at it. I said, holy cow, he's going sideways up the page. She said, no, it's not. He's turning the book. I said, no, he's going sideways up the page. He's turning up the page. And then he stopped and he closed the book like this, going into meditation. His wife puts the cell phone away. I said, the book's opening again. She got the cell phone. He's going again. He's writing away. And then he relates the message. So one was from Aunt Terrell, and the other was from Evita, who was supposedly the woman that runs the ship, does the ship. And what it said in the message was, Grant doesn't need to see. He already knows. And I'm going,
Right.
Wow. I was just floored. I go, wow, that's exactly right. Because he asked me, he said, so what do you think? I go, yeah, that was pretty cool. And I'm thinking inside my head, I'm going, that was garbage, man. If you see what I saw in 1975, this isn't flashing lights, is nothing. But it was that message. It was like, Grant doesn't need to see, he already knows. So this is the thing and that's the whole idea, is you spend your life trying to find out who's got the message? Is somebody breaking through, whether it's channeling? I watch a lot of channelers or people like these kids. I said, this is reproducible. This is something you can actually reproduce. You can bring in a skeptic into the room, and if he can't do it, and then you take the stuff and you can actually, these kids are not going to miss. It's not 2 out of 3. The same as I wrote a lot on savants. And you get these guys like this, what was his name? He was out of New York City. He was on 60 Minutes Australia in 1983. Finn was his last name. But they asked him, they do these calendar counting things. So they asked him, George, tell me the date, this date, the date in the year 1 and stuff like this. And he's just naming this stuff off. And they said, George, you're so good. How do you do that, George? That's pretty good. Hey, that's pretty good. All right. It's in my head. Yeah. And then he says, George, let me ask you a question. What's 2 times 3? And he goes, would that be 5? And he goes, what's 5 times 7? Would that be 50? Yeah, and so you think he's calculating. He's not calculating any. The guy can't button his shirt. And that's the whole thing. He's the same thing. He's got left brain damage when you shut that down. So that's the whole idea, is to find the contactees who have been in the field, find the channelers who have been able to shut off the left brain, because that's basically what you're doing. If you're doing meditation, you're shutting the left brain down. You're giving the left brain something to do. You say, hey, count the breaths. And the left brain goes, yeah, I'm the best breath counter there is. No. And then after about 30 seconds, it gets bored and you got to go back and say, count the breath, just follow the breath. And what you're doing is you're putting the left brain to sleep, same as hypnosis. It's all the same tactic. It's shutting that little voice that just won't shut down. And when you can do that, and so the kids, the importance of the telepathy kids is they're 100% accurate, means they completely shut it down. And that's what you want, is somebody who's there and is very accurate. Then you can start asking them. And so when they go from getting, say, 50 numbers right or made up words or whatever it is, you get that. Then when you ask them, okay, what you were talking to an angel or you're talking to a dead person, what did they say? You can rely on that information. It's almost like the inspired word of God. It is going to be accurate material, which happened to me. The stuff I got in 2016 was 24 things. Nothing I've ever gotten to those downloads has ever been wrong. Never.
Did you write it all down as soon as you got it?
Fortunately, I did. The one in 2012 was very easy to remember, because basically what it was, 3 things. And it was basically the Canadian government memo from 1950 that says flying saucers exist. It's the most highly classified subject in the United States. We were told it's the tremendous significance to the Americans. A small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush are trying to back engineer it. And then the very next line came into my head during this and it happened instantaneously. This download, the very next line says, and we were also told by American officials that other things might be associated with the phenomena, such as mental phenomena. And I went, oh, I forgot about that line. And that was the whole thing. So in 1950 already, the Canadians had been told by the Americans that mental phenomena was a part. How would they know that? There was no contactees until Adamski in 1952. And the reason they would have known possibly is because the Roswell thing, we originally, in the 80s, we thought it was 4 dead aliens because of the MJ-12 document. But then later, all these witnesses started coming forward and said, no, it's 3 dead aliens and 1 live alien. And the alien was talking in people's heads. So that's how the Americans would know that mental phenomena was involved. They couldn't figure out how this alien was talking in their heads. That was the one thing. And the other thing was, we chased around this Dr. Eric Walker, who was one of the guys who set up the cover up. And at one point he says to us, he's talking in rhymes and riddles. He says, look, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And then the guy really didn't have an answer. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken into the control group. Very few people understand how it works. And he talked about the control group as a group of elites. If you were in the group, I would know. And so he talked about this. What do you know about ESP? Then 2 years later, that was 1991, Jan Harrison is with Ben Rich, and Ben Rich is giving this lecture at UCLA. And as he's leaving the building, he realizes, I got to get to talk to him. And he said, I saw this sighting when I was 10 years old. I've been fascinated my whole life. I became an electrical engineer. I need to know, how did they get here? How does the propulsion system work? And Ben Rich turns and says exactly what Walker said. Let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And he said, it means everything in time and space is connected. He said, that's how it works. And he leaves the building and gets in his car and drives away. That's this whole idea that the information is there, but I think that the holdback now is going to be science still can't go there. They're still into this thing where you got to be whatever's with 94% in the National Academy of Sciences claim to be atheists and all this kind of stuff, where you got to have that little worldview. And if you step out of that little row that everybody's in, you get ostracized. And if you're a professor, and I knew this at university because I was at university for 40 years, that's a big thing. You don't want to be ostracized. You got a PhD, you worked your way up, even though we call it piled higher and deeper. because it was like guys who they get a master's, same like me. You get a bachelor's degree and then you go, the hell am I going to do with this thing? This thing's useless. And they go, oh, I know, I'll get a master's degree and I'll get a higher pay when I leave. And then you get a master's degree and you get no experience and nobody will hire you with your master's degree. And then you go, no, I'm really stuck. What am I going to do with a master's degree? And go, okay, oh, I'll get a PhD and I can teach people. And that's how, in my opinion, most PhDs come from, is that just people want to keep going to school. They didn't want to actually go out and get a job like everybody else.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in what you just said there, Grant. It is so funny. Yeah, you're talking so much there. There's things I want to say while you're doing it, but I don't want to interrupt you because you're dropping such awesome amounts of information there. Yeah, let me think where I want to go with this for a second. I want to say something about one more thing about the telepathy tapes before we move on. It's when you talk about negative energy, quantum physics talks about negative energy, and there's this level of energy below what we understand. And in there is an infinite amount of energy and information. We've heard this all before. So that's probably what this field of energy is that these kids are tapping into, because they don't have their left brain with all the noise and the chatter there, and they're able to just let that be. When all of this gets way more popular than it already is, that's going to start to crack this sort of materialist view. I'm sure you're familiar with Rupert Sheldrake's work, and he's been talking about this for a long time, just like Diane, and gets ridiculed and gets his TED Talk pulled back in 2012 or whenever that was. When these people start to get vindicated, and once this starts to gain traction, that's when I think big change comes. So that's why I think the telepathy tapes is so important, because you have this undeniable proof that this is happening, that this is real. And then the next stage is going to be, okay, they're doing it. Is there a way that you can train the average person to be involved with this? And that may be the bigger secret. That may be the big thing they don't want out. I think everybody knows, or at least suspects, that the UFO is a real thing, and that the government most likely is reverse engineering these things. We have high-level people saying this. How graphic does that conversation need to be? I think I don't think they're that worried about people being aware of that. I think the consciousness thing that you're talking about, I think they're more worried about that, because that has bigger implications. That changes society, that changes markets, and it changes what the way we do business in academia and what we're teaching. So that's probably the more dangerous conversation.
That's where I think the cover up is. That's where I diverge from everybody else, where they believe the nuts and bolts thing, that they're, like you said, like they're back engineering. Eric Davis, if you've seen when he had Soul, where he was interviewed at Soul, he was eating dinner. And I knew Eric Davis fairly well back in 2002 when the Wilson Leak document leaked. But he stated categorically, as far as he's concerned, the program was shut down in 1989. They weren't getting anywhere. And it was, we always talked about the core story where Jacques Vallée, Kit Green from the CIA, and Hal Puthoff got together at a Denny's restaurant in the 1980s. And that's when they said, so what do we know? There's a lot of garbage floating around the UFO community. What do we know? And they concluded, we're being engaged by some sort of phenomena. We've got crash material, and we're not getting anywhere with it. We're not able to do it. Or if you go to Bob Bigelow, I just posted on, and he runs the Consciousness Project. And you got to remember, he's the guy that had the $22 million program for OSAP. So he's seen all the stuff. He's got all the files that we haven't seen and stuff like that. And basically he said, and he was the guy that they were going to get Lockheed was going to give them craft. And this was being arranged, and then it was blocked. And he said in his discussions with various contractors, they weren't getting anywhere. And he said, I think it has to do with consciousness. And that's this whole thing. Or like when you see Jim Semivan, and I keep saying the same thing with Jim Semivan. It's almost like the kids. I say, Jim Semivan, you got to take this guy seriously. You got to take every interview this guy does, and you got to listen to every word he says, because this guy had the experience. He's a real guy. And I remember Chris Bledsoe telling me, I was the guy that first exposed Jim Semivan's name back in 2016. And so he had the experience. And when you hear him talk, he talks about things like, there does not appear to be any there. And I keep saying to people, so what is he talking about? And you got to remember, he had at least 2 briefings. And in the one briefing he talks about, they came and they told him, get a conference room for 6 to 8 hours. And the guys who came into the building, to the Langley, had do not escort badges. So they could walk anywhere they wanted in the CIA, which would indicate they were pretty high level. And he said every one of them had as many tickets as I had. And he was an SES 2, which is the equivalent of a 2-star general. So these were high level people, and they put him in the room, and he said, they scared the living daylights out of me. So he got a briefing for 6 to 8 hours, and he said he knows what legacy programs is. He knows about the communication stuff. I can't talk about this. I can't talk about that. But he gives this sort of indication, and he calls it indigestible. And that's this thing about the consciousness thing where people are going to go, what? Or, this idea where I did the book called, what was it called? On the people who fly the craft. And I remember when I had the first experience in 2012, this is in Phoenix, Arizona. And the woman who ran the Phoenix MUFON group said to me, this is at the conference later on in the year. I came back there and she said, are you still going to talk to Pam Dupuy? And I said, yeah, I guess so. I think I must have agreed to this. And she said, oh, it's good. Pam's coming to the house on Monday. So I'm staying at this woman's house. She goes off to work and I'm sitting there and this Pam Dupuy comes and says, what did Stacy tell you about me? I said, nothing. She just said I should talk to you. That's good. She comes walking in. She's on this thing. I was abducted. I was sitting in a diaper at 2 years old in a field, and the UFO was there. And I'm remote viewing for the government. And it's what I'm listening to the same old story, the same stuff. And then she said, I still remember. She says, yeah, I was flying the craft last night. And I went, what? You were what? He says, flying the craft. I said, they let you fly the craft? Because she's in her 70s. She's 75 years old. I'm like, they let you. I was thinking of it. All I could think of is Saudi Arabian women that couldn't drive a car without a man in the car. I'm going, they got huge. It's like, no insurance, nothing. It's just, no, I've flown 3 different models. And I'm going, I was ready to throw her out of the house. I couldn't believe it. They let you fly the craft? And she says, yeah. And I said, fly craft. It's just, you do it with your mind. And suddenly I realized why they put me together. Now, Pam Dupuy talked about this thing where Jim Semivan says, he says, if you knew the story, it's indigestible. People are not going to be able to grab it. It's just so far out there. Or Jim Lukatsky says, when they asked when he got inside the craft, he said, we got inside the craft 2011, and we were in a congressional facility, and there was a senator there, which means they're being briefed. This is all this nonsense that it's illegal and stuff. Jim Semivan says, no, it's not illegal. Lukatsky says it's not illegal. And I've got a national security expert who worked in FEMA, who I'm going to be interviewing in a couple of weeks. And he said, I asked him, hey, all your jobs in government, do you ever see anything illegal going on? He said, no, never. And that's the whole deal. We got this idea, there's just Illuminati, it's running things and it's all illegal and stuff. And then Jim Semivan says, you can't do anything in the CIA without some lawyer looking over your shoulder. Everything is checked and double checked. So that's the whole thing where they say it's this indigestible thing where, going back to Pam Dupuy, she said to me, one bizarre story after another. She says, they've got crafts that are as big as the solar system. And I said, what are you talking about? And then you hear this thing, Chris Bledsoe, my friend Chris Bledsoe, and Terry Lovelace is another, has a thing where the craft is 30 feet across. And then you go inside the craft and it's the size of a football stadium inside.
I've heard this before.
We don't have that kind of technology. This is weird stuff. This is not nuts and bolts anymore. Right. Or I was thinking, I heard an interview done with somebody yesterday. And I remember one of the first cases I ever got in Carmen, which I never even really publicized, was there was a bunch of kids in this town, about 2,000 people. They had a dam up above on the hill, and they were collecting water. And these kids went to party on Saturday night, so they're all drinking. They're sitting on the dock and they're having a good time. It's 2:00 in the morning, whatever. And suddenly this UFO appears over the top of the water, shoots this light down into the water, and then suddenly this white object starts to appear under the water. And they're going, oh, they're starting to freak out. So what? The thing starts coming towards them. And it's under the water. It's coming towards them. And they're just absolutely freaking out. They actually went to the federal police, the Royal Canadian Police, and reported the fact they'd been drinking and the whole bit of what happened. This thing came towards them, and it got right up to the dock. They were there, and somebody took a rock and fired it at this thing, hit the thing. The thing broke into 5 pieces, and they went, phew. These pieces were going, and they went back to where the beam of light was, and they all reassembled and went back into the craft, and the beam went back in the craft and it flew off. And that kind of stuff makes you see that, yeah, maybe they're dropping hardware, which is what I think. I tell people, the craft comes 1,000 light years across the universe. And what you think, its pieces start to fall off the thing. Come on, they're dropping. I even talked to Hal Putoff, said, come on, Hal. You know what apportation is. You had this with Uri Geller in the lab, where Uri Geller cuts his mouth with the flight pin of Edgar Mitchell. And they go, where do you get my flight pin? And then they go back to the lab, and Uri Geller's in the next room, and the back half of the flight pin falls in behind Edgar Mitchell and Hal Putoff, and they pick it up. Oh, there's the back half of the flight pin. And that's the whole thing. They're dropping this stuff. It's the same thing. It's the Jesus circus. There must be laughing. They're going, look at that guy. Look at this material. And no 2 pieces are ever the same. Same as no two ground traces are ever the same. No two UFOs, according to Lukatsky, are the same. No two trees or leaves on a tree are the same. No two humans are the same. And you start to realize these patterns that they're telling us stuff and they're actually leaving the craft. I heard that Eric Davis had said this. He was sitting beside a friend of mine at the Soul Conference this year, and they were showing James Fox's new movie at the crash at Aztec, and the bodies and stuff. And Eric Davis was going, "No, that's not true. It's not true. They walked away. They walked away." And Eric Walker had told us that in 1990. We were talking to him about the bodies. He said, "How do you know? How do you know there was bodies? How do you know they didn't get up and walk away? You're assuming a lot of stuff, and most of the stuff you're assuming is wrong." And he started laughing. And when I heard this, I go, Walker was right. They walked away. And they actually left this intact craft. And
Right, I've heard that.
nobody
They
could
just left it there.
because it has this consciousness aspect to it. So I did 36 people who've flown the craft, and they would say the same thing. Whereas where I change it for the nuts and bolts to this whole thing, there is no out there, is this idea where two of them, and I couldn't go back and re-interview the people, but the one guy, Ron Johnson, he's a Mormon guy, good friend of mine. He's had experience his whole life. He's written 700 pages on his experiences and stuff like that. He's in the craft, and they say, "Where would you like to go, Ron?" And he said, "I'd like to see the Milky Way from a distance." And then they say these very key words. They say, "Okay, Ron, it's within you. Go within yourself and imagine it. When you can imagine it, then we'll go there." And then he imagines it, and he said, 1 second, intense G-force. And he looked, and the window was open. There was a Milky Way off in the distance. And that's this whole thing where Stephen Greer uses this expression all the time, the Sufi expression. You see yourself as a puny form when within you is enfolded the entire universe. That's where I've gone, is the whole idea. What you see out there, it's perception. All perception is wrong. You're not seeing stuff out there. All it is electromagnetic waves that are coming into your eyes, going into your brain, and your brain is taking the electromagnetic waves from your touch, from your hearing, from your mouth, all this sort of stuff from your eyes, and it's assembling this image. And it's all in your head. This whole idea that there is no, that's what Jim Semivan, I think, is meaning. There's no out there. It's all within yourself. So when and remote viewers have talked about this, you're not going anywhere. When somebody gives you a target, 453-709, and then the remote viewer goes, "Okay, I'm at the target." And then it doesn't say, "Hang on, I'm flying there. I'll be there in a minute." It's because it's
already there.
Itself. It's the same as out of body experience. People will tell you to go out, you got to go within. It's all within yourself, and it's all there. And the time and space, like you're having a dream. Is there time and space in a dream? Yeah, there is. But is there time and space in a dream? No, there's not. And it's this whole idea that time and space doesn't exist, that we create these things, and there may not be any time and space, as Don Hoffman has said. Time and space is doomed. If that's true, then how many universes can you fit on the head of a pin? It's just, it's all here. It's all now. And that's all. It's totally consciousness, all consciousness. And yeah, they can create physical matter, but then you got to realize that you and I are just puppets, that we're etheric beings. And we come into this puppet and we play this little puppet, and then it dies and we go back and then we play another little puppet. You are not the puppet, as I tell people. Just because you were King Henry VIII in grade 12 high school does not mean you're King Henry VIII. You're playing a role. We're all playing the role. Or you even get spiritual stuff that links from the telepathy kids. You get this spiritual stuff that links over. Jim Semivan's experience, which I pick up because I've watched all these side events and realized they're all connected. And he's talking, and he's being interviewed by James Ian Dolly. So Ian Dolly says he's trying to get him to explain his experience, what the beings look like. And I don't want to talk about it. They're still working on it. He doesn't really want to talk about his experience in the bedroom. And so James gives up and he said, "Oh, well, and one more question. Was there any telepathy involved?" And he said, that was the strangest part. He said, "I'm standing there," and he said, "and there was this being behind me. And I don't know what it was, whether it was a gray or a reptilian or whatever it was, but it had this guardian type thing going on about it." And I went, "Guardian type thing?" And I said to James, "Get him back. Ask him whether there's a right shoulder or left shoulder, because you've studied Dr. Michael Newton, the 7,000 lives, life between life, where he takes people back and he lets them die and they go into the spirit world. And all these 7,000 people tell him all this stuff. Then it's the same thing. The spirit guide, when you lead, you go in front of the council for a life review between 3 and 12 beings. You can't see their faces, and they've got these medals around them and stuff like that. Everybody describes it. And the spirit guide stands behind you on the left side. So I realized this, and I realized there was a guy who was a retired USS colonel out of Los Angeles who told me he flew Iraq, combat in Iraq. And he was telling me, he said, "There's these beings behind me. These people, I don't know if it's humans or aliens or whatever. They're telling me what to do behind me." So I went, hey, this is a pattern. This is a pattern. No, maybe this is just like a soul ride. This is like a play. We're we're pretending to be aliens. We're pretending to be humans. We're all etheric beings and stuff like that. So I went to Whitley Strieber, said, hey, Whitley, you've been on the craft a lot of times. He said, yeah. I said, you ever have anybody standing behind you telling you what to do? And he said, oh, you can't look behind you. And he said, all the time. I told you I was going to steal a craft. I was sitting at the panel board and I thought to myself, oh, I'd like to steal this thing. And somebody behind him started laughing. So this is the whole thing. It's all this connected stuff.
What was the name of that book? With
Michael Newton. He wrote a book called Journey of Souls, and the other one was Destiny of Souls. And he had an accident happen in his room where he's doing regression on people just back. He didn't believe in life reincarnation or anything like that. And he was regressing some guy. And the guy, and this is his whole thing, is this planned? Like the experiences, you also experience it. Is this planned? Is this a mission? Did you plan to do this? And most people go, yeah. Or 1 to 10 to go 11. And so Michael Newton had this guy in his room and he had a pain in his side. He couldn't get rid of the pain. So Michael Newton gets all frustrated. He can't get him. He didn't fall on anything as a kid and all this sort of stuff. He says, go to the source of the pain. He goes, oh. And he says, what's going on? He said, I'm on a battlefield. And he said, you're on a battlefield? What do you mean? He says, I'm in the Battle of Somme in World War II. And he's going, you are? And he says, look at your patch. So this guy's in pain. He's going, look at your patch. Because Michael Newton was a history guy. He's fascinated with war history and stuff like that. He's what patch? He's trying to figure out what regiment this guy was in. And so the guy did the whole thing. And Michael Newton was so blown away by this guy who checked all this stuff and it all checked out. And he was so blown away that he got his career. So what would he do? He would just take people and let them die in the spirit world, take them to their last life, let them die, and then say, okay, you're going to the light, you're going to the tunnel. Okay, what happens next? And then spirit guide comes, and then the dead people come to welcome you back, and you go back to your soul group. And so he did this, and he said all 7,000 people say the same thing. That they're all saying the same thing, especially the thing when you leave. And that's my sort of bottom line to how life works, is if you realize that reincarnation is a fact, then you came in, and you probably came in for a reason, no doubt about it. And you're going to leave, and they're only going to ask you one question when you leave in front of this council. They're going to say, so Matt, how did it work out? Because you can't bring up Hillary Clinton, the dog ate the homework, my mother-in-law. They're going to time out. This is not about your mother-in-law. This is about you. You planned this. How did it work out? And Michael Newton says all 7,000 people said the same thing. I could have done better. I was going to do this and I forgot to do it. And I knew I had to do that and I got scared. And it's this, you come into, they do these lessons. So Michael Newton was another one. It was one of these things where I didn't want to go to lecture. He was lecturing at Laughlin and I go, this is not UFOs. Like, I don't want to watch this guy. And I think, oh, I don't know if I'm going to watch this. And I'm thinking about it and go, okay, I'll go and lecture. And I saw this guy lecture and for 2 days, my head was just spinning. And that's how it works. It's like I've had these synchronistic things, which is the idea, the synchronicities. When you start to explain the synchronicities, maybe just simply things that you were shown before you came, like Michael Newton. You go through this thing, he says, before you come into the world, you sit in front of these big 3D screens and you see what's happening. You got to meet this person, this woman with the brooch. When you see that woman with the brooch, you got to meet up with her. You're going to do something with her. And all your soulmates, they play these little roles, and your sister's playing one role and all this sort of stuff. And so that's the whole thing. So you plan this role. So what I say is the whole life comes down to, I got to play the UFO guy instead of the leper or the untouchable in the streets of Calcutta. I got to play this I call it the Super Bowl. I got to play the Super Bowl. And you come into the world for a reason. When you leave, they're going to ask you, how did it work out? And so all you have to worry about is, why did it come into the world? The question you're going to get asked later, and what am I supposed to be doing? And am I doing it? What everybody else is doing is totally irrelevant. You came in here for a reason, and you got to figure out why you're here. And that's this whole thing. When you talk to experiencers, they'll all say this thing about the mission. Oh yeah. I think, and I'll say, you think they're your relatives, but what I think a lot of the synchronicity thing is that you saw this before you came in. And it's, if I say, who's your first girlfriend, it pops back into your head. It's like, oh yeah. You don't realize you saw it before. They're just showing you again a little glimpse of what you saw before you came in. And then suddenly you oh, I experienced this before. And it's just that you're remembering from this stuff. So that's the whole thing. To me, it's all going to turn out to be spiritual, which is really going to upset the materialist scientist guys. They want the technology and stuff like that. And everybody wants to live on the hill with the 2 cars and all the money and stuff like that. And if you're a billionaire, you want to be 2 billionaires, 5 billion, and it just goes on. This is for more and more. But I can almost guarantee you it's going to be a spiritual thing. It's going to be like when Jim Semivan said that thing. I was just floored when I said that, when he said this thing with this guardian type thing going on about it. And I went, whoa, that's a spirit guide. This, and then the whole thing changes. Like it's all a stage play, and you're doing this thing. And do you pick up the lesson or do you not pick up the lesson? There's no wrong. You're just playing these games. So it's, to me, it's going to be spiritual, and that's really going to upset a lot of people. I always talking about the fact that the Christians and the religious people are going to jump off the bridge. I say no. When this comes down to it, it's the secular materialist scientists who are going to be fighting over the cyanide pills. They're not going to be able to handle this. That, you mean I went to MIT, I spent all this money, and it's not true? It's just, they're going to be floored by it. And that's where you get things like the New York Times breaks it, where the New York Times makes the announcement rather than Stephen Greer or you or I. Then everybody goes, oh. And then we had, even before then, I had written an article called "The 64 Reasons They've Decided Not to Tell You the Truth." Stock market's going to melt down. People are going to realize, well, it's not worth anything. And the New York Times comes and does the article and says, yeah, the government is actually researching UFOs. And what happened? Absolutely nothing. And nobody jumped off a bridge. No, the stock market didn't melt down. And I think it's the same sort of thing. It's just that the government doesn't have the answers. It hasn't got a clue on this consciousness thing. There's a couple of guys like Tom DeLonge talked about when he's in a skiff. You know the story of the skiff. 2015, he's in the skiff with Robert Weiss, the head of Lockheed, the head scientist, and some other guy. I don't know who the third guy was. And he said to the head scientist, is saying, almost like Ben Rich, he said, hey, I just want to know how they get here. Said, what do you think? How did they get here? And then he was hanging around with Stephen Greer at the time, Tom DeLonge. And then he said, hey, I think consciousness may be involved. And he said, the head scientist for Lockheed said, now you're talking. And all he wanted to talk about for 45 minutes was consciousness. And that's what it's going to come down to. This is the missing key. And whether Ty's material will push the ball over the feet or over the goal line, where New York Times is going to do an article, stuff like that. But that's the absolute evidence, because in a lot of psychics, if there's a negative person around, it blocks their field. And then plus a lot of remote viewing and a lot of psychic work is you got 30% instead of 25%. This whoop-de-doo. These kids are 100% accurate. Yes, it's like, how can you deny that? And I think it's revolutionary if it gets going. And as pointed out, she beat out Rogan. She's had bigger.
Yes.
So
that's a big deal.
Something that has taken off. And yet I promote it to all the top UFO people, everybody you can think of who's a top person. I approached them with this thing, and nobody reached out to her to do anything. And this is the key part of the whole thing. And a lot of them, like remote viewing, I'll put off remote viewing. You think that he and Kid Green would be all over this and trying to get these kids and get them tested and stuff like that. So the research is going to be done at the University of Virginia, and we'll see where it goes. But it's never going to prove anything, because it's almost like the Blue Book thing. You're going to do all this sort of stuff, and some clown is going to come up and say, there may have been a tape recorder in the background that wasn't there. And then it's like, everybody goes, oh yeah, that's what it is. Or it's sleep paralysis or some stupid, giving it a name. And just because you give it a name, it doesn't explain anything. Explain it's just super psi. And it's like, super psi, what, you're using one unexplained to explain another unexplained?
There's also funding involved in taking care of these individuals. And this is the thing that's critical for this, because I agree with you. There's going to be a fight. There's going to be a fight about this. Yeah. And the materialists are not gonna back down, even though people that understand this can see this proven. But the fact that we're dealing with individuals that are nonverbal, autistic children, funding has got to be there for them, and the conversation has to change about that. And I think it's like when they use the threat level that our skies are unsafe and there can be collisions, and they're using that to push disclosure, right? It's something that's going to push the ball down the field a little bit, but there will be a fight. I have no doubt about that. One other thing I wanted to say, all right, this is a little bit weird, but let me know what you think about this. There's always been this conversation that Earth is a little bit like a prison planet. And maybe it's like that because people aren't aware that what you're saying is that reincarnation is real and you come in with a purpose. And if you keep people unaware of that, you can keep them in a low vibration, and you keep people in this state where they can't accomplish what they're doing, so they have to come back over and over again. If all that is real, then that narrative that Earth is a prison planet and that we're containers for these souls, that starts to make a little bit of sense. And you have to acknowledge that. And if that's all real, there may be other entities out there like holding that back at all costs. Have you come across that at all?
No, I don't really believe that there's any out there doing stuff to us. I think we agree to everything that's in there. So all the good stuff, it's all experience. When you get into reincarnation, it's experience. Michael Newton will talk about the fact that this is a low-level planet, but we come here to make up karma. It's like the idea where the biggest line getting in is handicapped people, because you can make up a lot of karma, where people are choosing this very dense experience to, and the beings are just at their consciousness, we're consciousness. So my idea is that God does not create the heaven and earth. That's our idea. God's judging us and he's doing this stuff, and that the consciousness is secondary. No, God creates the sparks of the divine, and they create the universe. We're creating the universe with our minds. So the universe gets more complex and people have different ideas, and it just gets more elaborate. And that's what's I think is going on. But Newton does talk about this idea that people will have to take a life break and they'll go to a planet that's very easy and stuff like that. And here you learn very powerful lessons because it's so dense and it's a very hard road. So the beings that are around us will have compassion for the fact that we're in this very dense world and that we're lost in terms of material, understanding of material, that there's the spirit was killed off 400 years ago, that idea, and that we get more into physical stuff and everything's all about physical and technology and stuff like that. And even she just died. She was at Ariel School.
Oh, yeah. The student?
Yeah, she just died. She talked about the fact that when she had the experience, she and her friend were running along the logs on the edge of the schoolyard. Emily Trim is her name. And she was running along the edge of the schoolyard and she was going along, and all of a sudden there's this flash and she looked beside her and this alien's bouncing up and down like they are. She's going, what the heck? And then boom, the thing's right in front of her and the stuff's coming out of the eyes. And she had what was called rapid image cycling, which is another really weird story about where you see this crosses over all sorts of things. So it's image cycling, where what you do is you get hundreds or thousands of images a second, and the brain is able to flip these images. So what she said is she's there and these images are coming out here and she's getting these technology images. And the last one is this giant flash. And she said, I don't think that means that the world's going to end. They said to me, you have technology and you could do better. The girl beside her was getting these images and they're flashing at a very high speed. And she's getting the ecological images that you're destroying the world and all this kind of stuff. And the weird thing about that, you see these crossovers. So one of the things that I worked on was the Bankston healing. If you've ever heard of this Bankston healing method.
I've heard it, but I don't know exactly what it is.
So it's supposed to be the Cadillac of all healing. They can do cancer as long as you have had radiation or chemotherapy. They claim the more serious the cancer is, the better they can heal it. And what it is this Bankston guy. He was doing a sociology PhD, and he was working part-time as a lifeguard at a pool. And there's this psychic guy by the name of Bennett Merrick. And Bennett Merrick was able to predict things and stuff like that. And he said, why do you do this? And he's doing a little project on this guy and giving him tests, and they'd go into the hospital, and the people would put their disease in an envelope at the front desk, and they'd have 50 envelopes, and Merrick would come in. Oh, this guy's got cancer. This guy's got lung, and he was 100% accurate. And he's like, how do you do this? And then he said, you're curing people. How do you do that? And he explained the technique, which I'll say in a second. But he said, put your hands on my back and heal me. And they put his hands on his back, and he had a real bad back. And he said, I've never had a back pain in 25 years since this guy did this. And he said, this is amazing. And so Bennett teaches him the technique. He said, what you do is you take ego images. So they're left brain images. Ego. You want a car, it's going to be blue, it's going to have an EV, it's going to have all the bells and whistles, and you imagine it in your head as clear as you can. I want a motor home. I want a new condo in Florida. I want this, I want that. And you get 20 images. And it can't be, I want to save the world. You can't use those images. It has to be an ego image. And as soon as I heard that, I go, he's shutting down the left brain.
Right.
The left. And so I went and took his course in Chicago. And I actually confronted him at one point. And what he does is you take these 20 images and you memorize them, and then you start running them through. And these images, and he takes a drum, and he goes faster and faster and faster. And then you get up to doing I don't know, 60 images a second or whatever. And these images are flapping. And then you take the images and you put them on a clock, and then you spin the clock. And he says he can go at 2,000 images a second. And I said, that's what happened at Ariel School. It's rapid image cycling. And then you take Susie Hansen, who's the top UFO researcher in New Zealand, and she tells a story. She says, it's 2011, and the beings take us to this theater down below, and we're in this theater, and there's 250 people, 200 to 250 people in this room. And the being comes out, and then he walks away, and there's an environmental image on the screen. And then another one, and another one. She said, suddenly there was 100 or more a second, and they had taught us how to do it. And I went, and so when I confronted Bennett Bankston, I said to him, you didn't get this thing. Bennett Merrick gave you this thing. And he said, yeah, talk to me at coffee break. And I never did talk to him. But in his book, it's called The Energy Cure. And in his book, he writes about Bennett Merrick, and he says, Oh, Bennett Merrick, he went off the deep end at the end. He actually thought he was an alien. And he said that he and I had come to the world to bring this healing technique to the world. And I go, I knew. And I went to the woman who does the healing in Chicago. She's done a couple for me and pretty successful. I went to her and I said, did you know that Bennett Merrick claimed he was an alien? And then he said Bankston was an alien as well. And then there's this thing that aliens are using this rapid image cycling. And it's not, so you got rapid image cycling. You don't sit down one day, Matt, and say, hey, I got nothing to do today. I think I'll just learn to flip 1,000 images in my head and cure cancer. You got that from somebody. And so she said, oh yeah, we always knew Bankston was an alien. And I said, you did? She says, yeah, I knew that story. And she said, do you know he had a major experience? I said, no, I didn't know that. And then she tells me that. And then she says, and I worked for J.L. Hynek. I said, no, you didn't tell me that. She's in Chicago. She worked for J.L. Hynek. It was this just bizarre thing. So this is this thing. You see these crossovers between these different phenomena, healing phenomena, and the alien type stuff, where we're picking this stuff up. But it's a fascinating world. But it's all going to be, this consciousness thing is going to be the ground of being, that everything is made out of consciousness. Everything is even this idea that nothing appears until you see it and this sort of stuff. But quantum physics is keeping up. So quantum physics is showing us all this stuff, and we're being validated by quantum physics, and it's just these other guys. But that happens in everything else. That people have set worldviews, whether it's religious worldviews where eventually your kids don't believe it anymore and it just breaks away. And we want it to happen, but we've got an eternity, and it's all about the lessons. So it's not about, we want to be there, we want to get the technology, we want to solve this thing. And that's what Eric Walker said to us. He said, hey, this is just curiosity. Admit it. Why should we change the rules and regulations to satisfy your curiosity? Admit it. You're just curious. And people go, no. And I say, yeah, he's absolutely right. People are just curious. They just want to know. Because the other question that Walker said to us, he said, okay, so when you figure it out, what are you going to do? When the dog catches the car, what do you do? And people go, oh, then I'll know. That's just curiosity. And what it does is it leads to the next question. So where are the aliens? Where are they from? How did they get here? And it's like a million questions. And the curiosity will ask another question, but nobody's ever going to do anything. If you're Lockheed, yeah, you're going to build a weapon or you're going to build something or whatever. But the average 99% of people, it's just they're curious. They want to know.
Curious.
And that's what Walker said. Why should we change the rules and regulations? And that was the first time I ever got the indication. I went, rules and regulations. And it was this, I started to look at these people like Jim Semivan, who said, no, it's totally legal. It's created by the President of the United States. Eisenhower created it with these PEDS, Presidential Emergency Action Documents. There's only 19 of them. None of them have ever been disclosed. None have ever been declassified and stuff like that. And it's continuity of government. It's built under the continuity of government, where it doesn't matter who you are. You're not going to get access to it because it's exempt from Congress. That's why at the end of last year, I'm thinking, yeah, I sort of got this figured out. But it's always, and you'll find this in the UFO field, that when you sit down, it it comes and does something weird again to drag you back in. And then you go, okay, I guess we're going to go down here. And now it's exciting stuff where you realize you're on the leading edge of another thing where I just can't believe that the UFO people are not picking this up and being all over it. The fact that these kids, you can actually reproduce this. And if you can show this under controlled conditions, the whole world changes. Non-local is the way it's at. And that's amazing, where there's no time, there's no space. You can go wherever you want. You can start. And to me, I said to Kai, because I helped her get interviews and stuff like that. And I said to her, if I could meet one of these kids, because I was a facility manager at the University of Manitoba. So I ran all the cleaning and the security and the hockey rink and stuff like that. And I remember I had autistic kids that in grade 12, they couldn't do anything in grade 12. So they have this life lesson, and they would send them to the university and they were supposed to clean. So I'd have these kids who couldn't talk or whatever and stuff. And if I had known then what I know now, so I want one more chance. If I had these kids, I would immediately, same as I do to channelers. I have one really channeler that I really like. And I say to her, ask them about time and space. Is there time and space? And then she comes back a day later, and this is the answer to your question and stuff like that. With these kids, it's the same thing. If they're in the field, why would you not go to these kids and start asking them questions?
For sure.
And that's the thing, is it's so revolutionary, but even the UFO people aren't picking up because they're so consumed with this idea of technology and making money and getting Nobel Prizes and patents and stuff. And that's where we've got this group of people, this invisible college, who are all sitting in the background and say, we don't want to really expose ourselves. But a lot of it's got to do with patents. You're not going to put your cards on the table until you got a patent. They're trying to figure it out, and they're trying to wait thing out. They're trying to figure it out and get research. That's what the whole fear thing is. That when Leslie Kean wrote the book in 2010, the general book, they said it was a threat to airline traffic. And I guess everyone, starts laughing. Come on, get out of here, airline traffic. So they started this whole thing about the threat narrative to the U.S. military. And that's a message. That's what Bob Bigelow, when he said, what's it all about? It's about messaging. So why are they over the U.S. military sites? Why are they over the nuclear sites? It's a message. They don't come over, they don't harass me. They don't do anything like that. They're harassing the military for a reason. They're trying to get either the disclosure comes faster through the military, or the military is pushing this, or whatever it is. But this is not happening by accident. And there's actually a map that I'm still trying to find from 1949. I think Ruppelt wrote this map where you can see Hanford, all these different plutonium places, all the things with the UFO sightings were taken. And they had this 1949, they do the thing. Even in 1944, they'll say the Foo Fighters only lasted for a year. And the Foo Fighters were on the edges of the wings of the planes in war during World War III. And we say, oh, they're harassing the planes, whatever. No, they've been doing this since World War II. And this is basically just a message. And they'll say they're interfering with the traffic. I say, who was here first? They were here first. Get the hell out of their airspace. No, get the hell out of their airspace. They control the airspace just because you stole it from the Indians and now you think you own it. No, but it's true that it's this message, but nobody talks about the message. Everybody's just saying how bad this is and how unfair it is that they're in our airspace and stuff like that. But I think there's a clear message as to what they want, or the nuclear weapons, where they shut down the nuclear weapons. And I say, thank God, at least we know that if there's a nuclear war, the aliens can shut it down, which is what they told the Canadians. They told the Canadians, the Canadians were in contact with the government, were in contact. His name is AFA. And AFA said to this guy, he said, we will never interfere with human society. It's this non-intervention thing. The only time we'll ever step in is if there's a nuclear exchange. In that case, we will step in and stop it. And we can actually do it and prove we could actually do it. We could take the moon in front of the entire world, split it in half, put it back together in front of the entire world. We can do that. But other than that, we'll allow the human race to stew in its own juices. And that's the whole thing about lessons, that you think there's good things and bad things, and good things and bad things are all relative. If you lose your job, that's a bad thing. But if I get your job, that's a good thing. Everything's about
all perspective.
It's all perspective.
That is absolutely wild. Grant, do you have 10 minutes real quick? I've been dying to talk about the Wilson Davis memo and your role in that. So could you just tell people real quick what the Wilson Davis memo is, and then what was your role in getting that out?
Okay, so Stephen Greer was briefing all these guys, the CIA director and the defense intelligence guy, and he briefed the J2, who's the head of intelligence for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is pretty high level. And Edgar Mitchell was in the room, and they were talking, and Greer had a document he got from NRO, which had a program on the document, a program name on the document. And Admiral Wilson, who was the general or the admiral that was at J2, said, hey, I'm in charge of that program. What the hell? I don't know about this. So he went and he tracked down the facility. And what he talked to, I'm pretty sure this is true. When he got on the phone with them, he said, and he was talking to a lawyer. So if it's all illegal, why have they got a lawyer talking to an admiral? Right. And they said, Admiral, you have no need to know. We can't talk to you. And he said, I'm in charge of this program and this sort of stuff. It said, Admiral, you have no need to know. We have to end this conversation. Hang with the phone on him. And he was so infuriated with this whole thing, he started this sort of search. And in 2002, I was hanging around with the NIDS people, some of the NIDS people, until I released that Eric Davis had talked to two presidents. Then I got cut loose. I can't keep my mouth shut, whatever. But why are we going to keep this secret? It would still be secret if I hadn't brought it out. Anyway, so I'm talking to these people, and it was about that time. And Eric Davis gave me the document, the Advanced Physics Theoretical Working Group, the notes for Oak Shannon. And so when I saw that document, so he gave me the Oak Shannon notes. And he said, when Oak dies, you can release his notes. And then Oak went public. And I go, okay, he's public. Now I'm going to release these documents because he lasted for 20 years. Everybody think he was going to die.
When did Oak go public? Was that on Jay's Project Unity? Okay.
Yeah. And then I figured, okay, I'm not going to sit quiet now. So I released the documents. And all Oak said is, I want to see the notes before we release them. So I sent them to him and he said, I faintly recall these notes. And then they all got upset that I was releasing the notes or whatever, but you wrote them and why are we keeping this stuff secret? Anyway, so I knew who Oak Shannon was. I was the only person in the world who knew who Oak Shannon was because Eric Davis had given me these notes. So anyway, we were at that conference and James Rigney from Australia is there. And he says, I'm leaving for Tucson with my assistant. and we're leaving at 11 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock and we got 5 hours and we're going to go for dinner there. And it's like a 5-hour drive. We got to be exactly on time. We're running out of time. And so he comes to me, he says, hey, I got a document I want to show you. And you get that all the time. And you go, yeah, I haven't got time, James. Email it to me. I got to go. I've got to be in Tucson. I got to leave. And he says, I know this is important. I got to show you this document. And I said, yeah, but I haven't got time. Well, we're heading to Tucson. And he said, give me 10 minutes. I said, okay, 10 minutes. So he gives me this document and he walks off. It's on his iPad. So I got this thing on the iPad and I look and it's Eric Davis and Oak Shannon. This is
2017, 18?
2018.
Because I think it was leaked in 2019, right?
November of 2018.
Okay.
And it was
so James Rigby is the guy that went to Edgar Mitchell's house and got the box of documents.
No, it was James Rigney got him from a guy who was an aerospace guy. James Rigney was an aerospace guy too, but there was a guy in Australia who was an aerospace guy who got them from Edgar Mitchell's kids. They were going to throw them out. And he said, no, don't throw them out. I'll take these documents. And he took this whole pile of documents, and Rigney's at this other guy's place in Australia, and he's looking through these documents, and there's this UFO documents, and there's 4 documents. There's the document, the Davies Wilson leak document. There's the alien autopsy, which I say is the more important document, the one where Kid Green says, this is real. This alien autopsy thing is real. And then there was a condolence letter, which I'm not allowed to talk about, but there's nothing. It's just a very famous person died, and Edgar Mitchell writes a condolence letter to the wife. And then the other one was where he's talking to Bigelow about the meetings, about what we're going to do at the meetings and stuff like that. This letter between him and Bigelow. All he showed me was this iPad. So I'm looking at this iPad and immediately I see Oak Shannon and I see Eric Davis. And I know this is a real deal. And I'm the only guy who knows Oak Shannon. And Eric Davis is good friends with Oak Shannon. I'm reading this document and I'm thinking to myself, what am I going to do? Maybe he's not the document. And I'm thinking, do I get my camera out? But I thought Brittany would come back because I'm photographing this iPad.
Yeah.
Photograph this document. So I read maybe the first page, maybe not even the first page, because I was so shocked by seeing Oak Shannon's name and Eric Davis's name, and maybe a page and a half. And I've never read the document yet. I have not yet read the document. So I read the first page and a half, whatever. And then he comes back and I go, where the hell did he get this? And he told me the story. And I said, I'm trying to think, I'm going to get this document. So I said, I'm releasing Managing Magic next spring. Yeah, maybe I could put this in the end of the document, the end of the book. Because he said he got a dream, and he emailed his wife in the middle of the night, she's in Australia, and said, photocopy that, or scan that document and send it to me. I got a researcher I want to give it to. So there was that part too. So then I said to him, I'll put it in the end of the book and I'll just leave it. I won't say anything. And somebody will read the book and go, where the hell does this document come from? And then, so he says, okay, so good. And I'm waiting. And then at the end of November, beginning of December, it's maybe a month later, he sends me the document. And then suddenly I look and it's 15 pages. And
so you read the whole thing at that point.
This is no longer a 2-page document. I'm going 15 pages. And then he sends me the alien autopsy document. It's in 11 pages. And it's like this explosive stuff. And I'm going, oh my God, what do I got to do? Because I knew Eric Davis and I knew all these.
Okay.
And I'm the guy that's going to cut their throats. And I'm going, I can't do this, man. This is an important document, but it's got to get out, but I can't do it. So then I'm talking to a guy, he's an AI expert out of Texas. And I should remember his name. But anyway, I'm talking to him and then he says, and I made the decision what I would do. So I wouldn't release the document myself, but anybody who wanted the document, they say, can I have the document? I say, yeah, sure, you can have a document. And some
you didn't want to be the one that's leaked.
So that's what happened. I gave it to this guy in Texas. And then he says, this is fantastic. Why you release it? I said, that's the whole point. I know these guys. I can't be the guy that cut their throat. And he said, okay, leave it with me. And he talked to a friend of his who worked in the Pentagon. And the guy said, put it on Reddit. Just put it on Reddit. Nobody's going to know. And then, he phones me and he says, I'm in an elevator in Chicago. I'm going to a meeting right now. I just want to let you know that document you gave me? I go, yeah. He said, I think it's on the internet now. Then I'm really freaking out. And it still took, I think, 3 months or whatever before Dolan found it on the internet. And then public with it.
But he knew it was real.
And I've gotten a lot of documents. I always tell people, I even make this joke now. I said, am I the only researcher who actually leaks documents? And I released the alien autopsy document, the Wilson leak document, the CIA channeling in the Pentagon, the memo. I released that. I released the Douglas aircraft notes. Douglas aircraft had a UFO study in 68, 250 pages. They're on a site called Check the Evidence in England. I gave them that document. All these documents that I released, the Johnson study, the study that was done for President Johnson, they wrote a book on it. It never was published. And I got 100 of the 300 pages, the conclusion as to what they told Johnson, all this sort of stuff. And I released this and I'm going back and I'm going, because I was really upset. The one thing that upset me about the Wilson Leaf document was Leslie Kane had it for 10 years, Jacques Vallée had it for 10 years, and we know that Hal Puthoff had it for 10 years because he showed 2 pages to Richard Dolan. And I remember he phones me up just before the document became public, and he said, "Did you show the document to Dolan?" I go, "No, I didn't show a document to Dolan." He said, "He's on Jimmy Church talking about it." I said,
Oh,
"Yes."
yeah.
And then I'm thinking to myself, maybe I did give it to him. I remember.
He was shown those pages.
And then I went and listened to it, and then I was really scared when I heard him, and I'm going, he's talking about the Wilson Leaf document. I'm going, holy cow. And so there's this weird freak out thing where it eventually became public, and now everybody's forgotten, and it's been read into Congress. And it's a big thing, but it's an important document as well. It sort of confirms, it's almost like the New York Times article. It's confirmation from a high-level official that this is real. And everybody goes, the Joint Chiefs of Staff was cut out, and the document, there's no mistakes in the document. It's like the MJ-12 document where you find this mistake and that mistake and this mistake. People were accusing us of hoaxing the thing at the very beginning and doing all these things where this isn't right and this protocol is not right or whatever. And I just knew the key thing was nobody knew who
book was.
Where O'Shannon was. I was the only person.
Right.
So I knew this is a real document.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great story, Grant.
Let me tell you one, because you wanted to talk about Rendlesham. I'll tell you a quick story about Rendlesham.
Yeah.
Again, these patterns. The reason I was interested in Rendlesham was not because of the Rendlesham story. I was interested in the Rendlesham story starting with the fact there was a ground trace. Most people don't realize that the phenomena is doing one thing. It does the Foo Fighters only for a year, then it stops. Then it does the Swedish thing where it crashes into swamps. Then it does the Adamski thing with the balls under it. Then it does the Greys. And there has not been a ground trace. Because Stanton used to say, oh, we need physical evidence. There's 4,000 ground traces. This is absolute evidence. There's not been a ground trace for 30 years. I remember writing to Ted Phillips in 2001. I've still got the letter. And I said, Ted, am I making something up here, or have the ground trace?
It's Rendlesham.
And he said, they've stopped. Yeah, they basically stopped. And that's the whole thing. So the phenomenon, it does something, and then it changes the crop circles, and it does this, and then it does something else. And it's just, it just keeps doing these weird things, almost like they're turning the pages. So when Peniston had the ground trace, and then I realized he got the download, because I had the download. That's why I was interested. I was Peniston. Like, I realized that this guy was not making this up, that they do give you this material. And it comes in a weird way where it comes in, because then it was this binary code that was at the time. They give this and you got to figure it, they make you figure it out and all this kind of stuff. So I was interested in that. And then I got interested in the nuclear weapon thing, the fact that they had zapped the nuclear weapon thing. And I had a case in North Dakota where I actually went to the site, where a girl tells me this thing came out of the 3 girls are standing at the fence. This thing comes out of the thing. So I was interested in the nuclear weapon thing. And then I was interested in the mathematics. When I got into interviewing Jimmy Blanchette, I realized that he had this unbelievable ability, all these things, everything fit, that there's the weight of the universe, the number of this, and the size of the atom and stuff. And it was all connected to that message that Peniston had got. And I was so enthralled with this that I actually sent it to Dr. Josephson. Dr. Josephson won, I think, the 1993 Nobel Prize
Dr. Josephson?
Superconductivity. And he believes in ESP. And he was actually not allowed, he won the Nobel Prize, and he was ostracized. He was not allowed to work with graduate students. So he's in his 80s. And I said, Dr. Josephson, can you look at this mathematics? This is unbelievable. Because I said to this guy, man, you should win a Nobel Prize. This is, you see what he's come up with, all this sort of stuff, and how it all fits together, like to within 0.001% and all these figures and stuff like that. And then he writes me, Josephson writes me back. And remember, he's got the guy that was ostracized for believing in telepathy. He writes me back and says, I haven't got time to look at this kind of stuff. And so I write him back, and I get Jimmy. I said, Jimmy, give me 12 slides. Just 12 slides, the basic of your theory and stuff like that. So I sent Josephson the 12 slides. I said, just 12 slides. Just look at these 12 slides. Shouldn't take you that long. And he said, yeah, this guy looks kooky to me. And then so I wrote back, and this is this whole idea. You've based your whole, you're a Nobel Prize winner. You're not going to take any flack. We're not getting any weird stuff anymore. I've already got in trouble with my weird stuff. And I wrote him back. I said, that's strange, don't you think, Mr. Josephson, that you're calling this guy a kook? Didn't everybody was calling you at one time? Listen, you think this guy would believe because he believed in telepathy? He was as skeptical and materialistic as the rest of them.
That's
so just a little theory that he backed.
That's so wild. Yeah, I mean, that whole story with the binary code, I noticed that people will mention the binary code, but I have not seen anybody do like any deep dives into, obviously Gary wrote the book and he's writing book number 2, Gary Osborne. But I see all these researchers, they talk about the Rendlesham Forest case and they lump that in with Robert Hastings' work, how it's another nuclear site, and they kind of brush over this binary code. But I don't see anybody like saying, hey, what is that?
Yeah.
The binary code? Let's dig into that. Let's figure this out.
That's the whole thing. They don't want to touch the experiencer. Once you say you got a message from an alien, it's stay away from that. That's gonna kill your project. You're gonna be running with the kooks and stuff like that. And
But that's ridiculous.
It's the most. That's the way I say it. You got to talk to the people who are talking to the intelligence. Lights in the sky don't get you anywhere. It says, yeah, something's going on, and it's probably not us. Yeah, it gets that, but it doesn't get you anything else. So that's why that case is so important. And the other thing that was important is this whole hitchhiker effect, where people get this whole thing about the evil aliens, all this nonsense about the hitchhiker effect. I said, come on, hitchhiker effect. Everybody knows hitchhiker effect. Even ghosts. I've got the Ron Johnson, the guy that saw the Milky Way from a distance. He had the one where he does a lot of ghost hunting. So he's in Utah, he's in Price, Utah, he's in the cemetery, and he's got this crypt thing, and he's got the camera all set up, and he's yelling at the crypt. He says, come on, show yourself, come on out. And I says, all of a sudden this black thing starts coming out of it, forming outside the crypt, and he's going, oh, and he takes this photograph. He takes one photograph of this thing, you can see this black thing, and it encompassed the whole thing. And he said he took off, he grabbed the camera, he took off. He said it was 5 years before that thing left him alone. It was haunting him for 5 years. And that's this whole thing. The hitchhiker effect is an effect, but it's the whole idea of consciousness. Whatever you think, it's reflective. And that's where you take Chase. Brandon Fugel says, when you come on the ranch, they warn you, this thing is reflective. Be careful what you think. And that's the whole thing. When I laughed and people were upset about it, these 3 guys at Skinwalker Ranch had this experience. And it was like, I said, were they carrying guns? And they go, yeah, they're special forces guys. And I go, well, of course they had a negative experience. And the night that they had the experience with the kid being bombarded with the UFOs in his room, people don't realize that night they gave a briefing to the Homeland Security, 2 of the top people in Homeland Security, trying to get funding because ATIP had been cut, the money had been cut off, and they were trying to find funding. So they gave this briefing, and they scared the living daylights out of these 2 guys. These guys couldn't sleep. That was the same night. So they give this briefing, and at Skinwalker Ranch, the same night as the bombardment, they had a thing at Homestead 2 where this guy had this encounter with this thing inside their Homestead 2. So you see all these things are connected. So it's like, be careful what you think. And so I had one girl came and he said, oh, there was 2 guys who were injured by aliens. Okay, what happened? I said, they went into this portal and the one guy got cancer and then the other guy died. And I go, oh, question, did they have guns? Oh yeah, they're special forces. I said, okay, maybe they deserved it. It was this idea. If you don't realize that it's this reflective nature is whatever you put in is what you get back. And Barbara Streisand's stepson, Chris Peters, tells a story that when he first had the encounter, he was just blown away. And he's going, I can't believe, yeah, come on. And he said to them in the car, he says, okay, if you're an extraterrestrial, where the hell you are, he said, give me something in my head that I don't already know. And they went, biocentrics. And he goes, biocentrics. And he goes and looks out, and it's this idea that consciousness and biology are centric. It's primary. And then he has this thing, and he said that beings told him, when we come into your world, we go into your head and we find out what's in your head. And it is with that we build a message. And that's why you see Mac talked about that at the end of his life.
Abduction or Passport to the Cosmos?
Passport to the Cosmos. He writes about this, and he said this idea that if you're in fear, you may see a gray. If you're very high energy, and I have one girl write a book who dealt with the reptilians, which only appeared in 1980, and she very high, a lot of sexual stuff. And there was a famous singer, female singer. It was all sex and stuff, having sex with the aliens and stuff like that. The people who are around reptilians are very high energy people. And then you get the people who are very spiritual, like Chris Bledsoe, who have the etheric beings. And you start to realize that it's almost like the dream thing, that you're creating the dream, you're creating the figures. And if you have a bad day, you're going to have a bad dream. You're going to have these things, or in psychedelics where they have the PTSD thing, where they did it London,
right,
in England, where they do the thing with the guy with PTSD. It's the only thing that can relieve PTSD. So they took him, and then they said, how many of these guys had bad trips? He said, all of them. That's the whole
right. Because they're confronted with all of it.
A bad trip. And we see it as bad, almost like the people who have bad near-death experiences. They figured that the 10% of near-death experiences are people who will not let go. And that's this idea. And I learned that because I did 27 sessions, wrote a book on psilocybin. And I know that if you're scared, if you're going in there and you're not willing to let go, get ready. You're going to hell. It's like unbelievable. And once you give up, I remember they did it to me one time that it was like this thing was going on and the stuff was coming at me and I couldn't stop. And I thought, okay, I took the drug. It's my fault. What's the big deal? This is hell. I'm going to be in hell forever. And that was
Yeah.
surrender. And boom, I was gone. That was
And
it.
relax.
I was in the bliss thing. And then so I said, okay, I know next time they do that crap to me, I'm just going to say it's going to last for a second, just surrender and go out. And you think I could remember? It's like they can block your memory. So in the second time it happened to me again. And I'm going, oh, okay, I did it. Okay, this is the way it's going to be for in eternity. And boom, it's again. How can they do that? It was just so weird. And it was this idea that people don't realize there's so much part of what they're experiencing. They think there's an out there to them. And that's what Jim Semivan says. And I keep saying, what does he mean? There does not appear to be any there. And that's this whole idea. It may be all internal, that it's all happening inside ourselves. And the universe is a pinprick wide and it's just all vibration. So they're on a higher vibration. They lower their vibration. We raise our vibration, or you can shut off that thing and you raise your vibration and you go into the field. And so the whole idea is, why would you not talk to these people if they're interacting? Or Nick Cook's wife, who wrote the book Hunt for Zero Point, he tells the story. And I sent him the telepathy tapes and he said, you're the 5th person in 5 days that sent this to me. I think you're the 3rd. And yet I don't think he did anything with it. And he's running the Consciousness Institute. And he had the thanks with his wife. This is what sort of blew him away from the technology to the thing, where his wife has this shared near-death experience. She's with her mother. Mother's dying. I don't know if you heard the story. Mother's dying. He's sitting in the room, and all of a sudden the mother just dies. She takes her last breath, and the wife's holding her hand. Wife gets up and goes, everything's perfect. He goes walking out of the room. And he goes, what? What are you talking about? And he goes running after. He says, what are you talking about? Everything's perfect. She says, weren't you there? He said, no, wasn't it? Oh, what do you mean? Where was it? Where were you? Says, I was in this field. And I knew the answer to everything in the universe, and they wouldn't let me bring it back. And everything was perfect, which is another thing that I've got an interview I do with a near-death experience person, a QTHT people, a guy who's in a float tank. And I've got all these people, and they all had this impression where everything's perfect. Everything's exactly the way it's supposed to be. And so we have this complaining about stuff instead of just accepting and saying, taking responsibility that maybe you are the conductor of your play. And something happens, you go, why would I plan this?
Right.
Even if you didn't plan it, it's like psychology, the idea that until you take responsibility for your disease, you ain't going anywhere. You have to take responsibility, whether it's your fault or not. And so that's so these key lessons, but there are all these spiritual lessons. There's this reincarnation lesson, which the kids talk about. They all talk about, they do foreign languages. They all talk about reincarnation. And these are kids that just barely learned to spell, forget about reading and stuff like that. There's no way. So I'm fascinated. I feel very honored that I got to play the game. And I try to, give gratitude every day, which is something I learned in the psychedelic experience. I had 4 sessions where they took me through a compassion meditation where people were dying around me and I could feel their pain and stuff like that and all these different things. And then the gratitude meditation where I'd be in the meditation, I'd be in the middle of this session, 2 hours in or something. I go, where's the gratitude guy's going to come tonight? Because the gratitude, and it would be just suddenly you get this thing and it'd be like oil coming over you and you feel so grateful. And so I called the gratitude guy. I never saw who it was. I never saw anybody. There was somebody behind me, or there was a voice or something that was behind me, but I never saw anybody. But it was this gratitude. It's like, oh, the gratitude guy's here. So I learned the gratitude. So I try to, in the field, realize that most people, the expression is most people live lives of quiet desperation. You and I are living in the Super Bowl of all Super Bowls. And we got to say thank you every day that we got to play this game and then put it out there, because it doesn't gain anything by keeping it to yourself. It's not collecting stamps. This is about putting it out and trying to, if it's important to you and me, it should be important to everybody else. And what we're trying to do is not convince people, but just get the discussion going. And the more discussion, it's like when you say, when was gay marriage acceptable? And people, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, I don't know. It just happens. And that's what's going to happen. It's just going to slowly go. And eventually at one point, 95% of the people are going to make the right decision. And it's going to be like it always was there. And everybody forgets about what happened in the past.
Grant, that's a great way to end this. I really want to thank you for all the work you've done. Thank you for coming on the show today. This was so much fun hearing you go off and talk about all your experiences and your thoughts on this. I know you've got a lot of timing with this, but tell everybody how they can find you. Any last words?
Yeah, Twitter is my Grant Cameron at Twitter. I have It's All Connected is my publishing. We've tried to help people who show them how to publish their book. We don't take anything for it, but if I see an important story And I've had a couple bestsellers. One guy out of Israel, if you've never interviewed Yossi Ronan, we helped him publish his book. It turned out to be a pretty big bestseller. It was called One. It's the same idea. Everything is one. That's the basic message of the beings. And the way I describe it is everything that you consider to be evil in the modern world is created by one thing only, the mistaken belief in separation. If you believe everything is one, it all changes. So Yossi Ronan, we helped him publish his book. So it's all connected as the publishing company that we started. And we just show people how to do it. Sometimes we have to do some stuff for people. But if I see a good story and I go, have you written this down? And they go, no. So you should at least write it down for your kids to let your kids know. Because 500 years from now, this is going to be the biggest story of all times. And your kids people that succeed you should realize that you were part of this story. And so we try to get people to put it out. And aliens, people always say, if they wrote a book, did they tell you to write the book? Yes. Did they help you? Yes. And you get this over and over again. Or I haven't written the book. Do they want you to write the book? Yeah, they're forcing me to write a book. Yeah. And that's the whole thing. And then Presidential UFO is my Facebook. And you can actually see I'm having a war with the guy who's the briefer to the president. Follow my
Book.
Twitter. We're having this back and forth. And one guy actually said, I feel really good to see your adversarial position with this guy because everybody's afraid of the guy. And I figured you punch me, everybody's a tough guy till he gets the first punch in the face. And I'm going back and forth with this guy. And this may be the guy, he's just retired as of a couple of days ago. And the new guy, I think we already know who the new guy is, but they actually have a guy who interacts. His job, he says, is to deal with the loons. So you can actually write this guy, and maybe now he's retired, he won't reply, but you'll see some of this correspondence I had back and forth with him 30 times. He calls me a crook and I'm stealing people's quotes. And that's what you do. You take quotes and you footnote them and you write books based upon what people are saying. But some of that stuff, and some of the stuff is pretty interesting that I've been putting up lately on Twitter and Facebook. And anybody wants to contact me, it's presidential UFO or whitehouse.ufo@gmail.com.
Awesome. Grant, thank you so much. I'd love to have you back on anytime. Chat some more. This is really great. All right, everybody. Thanks a lot. Thanks for watching the show. I hope you guys are enjoying the content. If you're finding any value, please hit that subscribe button, that like button, and leave a comment. It doesn't cost you anything, and it really helps out the show.